So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our regular meeting after the monetary policy session of the Bank Board. I'm very pleased to welcome Vice Governor of the Czech National Bank, Mr. Vladimír Tomšík.
Good morning, everybody.
Tomáš Holub, Head of Monetary Section, and Peter Král, who will hold the opening presentation after that. So, please, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the floor, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is really my great pleasure and honor to be here again after some time in this role, giving CNB's presentation on actual and especially on expected future macroeconomic developments. Let me start by introducing the structure of my presentation. First of all, I will introduce the assumptions on which our new forecast is based. After that, I will describe in detail the picture which is brought about by the new macroeconomic forecast. And finally, I will provide you with a brief comparison of the new forecast with the previous one. As for the external assumptions of the new forecast, we can say that economic activity in the countries of our major trading partners, which is the euro area, continues to recover, and we can expect that GDP growth in the euro area will be around 2% over the entire forecast horizon. The actual quite deep and recently even deepening decline in producer prices in the effective euro area will subside only gradually and will not fade away until early 2017, as the previous sharp drop in crude oil price will also fade away gradually. The CPI outlook for the effective euro area is persistently below 2% over the entire horizon. By the way, our forecast assumes that the crude oil price will be moderately growing over the entire forecast horizon from their current little bit elevated levels. On the subdued inflation developments in the euro area, reacted the ECB, taking further measures in this direction at its monetary policy meeting in March, and their measures were reflected in the outlook for three-month Euribor interest rate, which is quite visibly below zero over the whole forecast horizon, as you can see in this graph. In 2015, we saw quite visible drop in public budget deficit in the Czech Republic to 0.4%, which is the record low level for the whole history since 1995. And this was driven mainly by robust economic growth, bringing about a sharp increase in tax and other revenues of general government sector. The overall fiscal policy on fiscal impulse was highly expansionary due to the fact that government sector investment rose quite sharply as the government tried to draw as much money as possible from the previous programming period for the EU funds. For this year, we can expect further decline of the headline deficit to 0.1%, which will be a consequence of a strong decline in government sector investment. It will be also brought by additional revenue increases stemming from the introduction of the VAT control statements and by the further increases in excise duties on tobacco. In 2017, we can expect that the public budgets will turn positive, and we can expect surplus at about 0.5% of GDP. In the same direction will also further increases of excise duties, harmonization increases work, and we can expect reacceleration of drawdown of money from the EU funds. Here you can see the fiscal impulse as was implemented into our forecast. For 2016, we can expect negative fiscal impulse of minus 0.8 percentage point to GDP dynamics, stemming primarily from the expected strong decline in government sector investment. For 2017, one can expect roughly neutral fiscal impulse via public investment and via private consumption, whereas the general government will contribute to the GDP dynamic positively by the fact that government spending will increase in both nominal and real terms. We can expect that general government wages will increase, that pensions will be increased, and other current spending will be also growing. As for the assumptions for monetary policy, our new forecast assumes that the market interest rates will be flat and the exchange rate will be used as a further monetary policy instrument until mid-2017. Consistent with the forecast thereafter is an increase in nominal interest rates. The currently observed positive interest rate differential vis-à-vis Czech koruna and the euro, and the repercussion of the further ECB measures to relax its monetary policy will manifest themselves after the assumed exit from the current exchange rate commitment. Thus, after the assumed exit, koruna will moderately appreciate due to this positive interest rate differential and due to the renewed real convergence process, which will, however, be more slow compared to what we observed before the crisis. All in all, the exit should not result in the exchange rate appreciating sharply to the slightly overvalued level recorded before the CNB started intervening in 2013, among other things because of the fact that in the meantime the weakened nominal exchange rate is passing through into domestic price level and other domestic nominal variables. As you know, inflation increased slightly at the beginning of this year, but remained still well below the CNB's 2% target or below the lower boundary of its tolerance band, respectively. We can expect that in the near term, inflation will decrease slowly, will decrease slightly, close to zero, and one cannot rule out that for a short period of time we will see slightly negative figures. After that, inflation will start growing again, hitting the 2% target at the monetary policy horizon, which is the second and the third quarter of 2017. As you also know, the Czech economic growth slowed down somewhat in late 2015, and we expect that that the GDP will follow this tendency as the fiscal policy will generate strong negative impulse via drop in government investment. On the other hand, domestic economic activity will be supported by still relaxed domestic monetary conditions via extremely low nominal interest rates and weakened koruna exchange rate. The domestic activity and especially private investment will be boosted by still low oil prices and by steadily growing foreign demand. That's why after this year's drop in government investment fade away, we can expect a pickup in domestic GDP growth. The currently observed relatively strong anti-inflationary effects of import prices will gradually fade away during the rest of this year, and this will be pushing domestic prices upwards, which will be happening against the backdrop of persistent domestic inflationary pressures stemming from a labor market and real economy developments. As you know, robust economic growth has been reflected in positive developments in the Czech labor market over the last couple of quarters, and we can expect this trend to follow even for the next couple of years. Headline inflation rose at the beginning of this year. Actually, it increased in January and slightly decelerated in February and March. This making an average number of 0.5% for the first quarter of this year. This was an effect of the renewed growth of regulated prices, whereas in the opposite direction, continued decline in fuel and a renewed decline in food prices were working. Core inflation, which is adjusted inflation, excluding fuels and food, was in the first quarter roughly stable, moderately above 1%, and both its components, namely tradable and non-tradable goods, were in positive territory. As I already mentioned, we can expect that in the near term, headline inflation will slightly decelerate close to zero, and one cannot rule out slightly negative figures. At the end of this year, it will start growing again, hitting the 2% inflation target at the monetary policy horizon and being slightly above it thereafter. A monetary policy relevant inflation, which is headline inflation, excluding primary effects of indirect tax changes, rose to 0.3% in the first quarter of this year, being well below the 2% CNB's inflation target. Over the forecast horizon, the monetary policy inflation will follow the similar path to headline inflation. The difference between headline and monetary policy inflation will be done by further increases of excise duties on cigarettes, while in the opposite direction, a transfer of restaurant services from the standard value-added tax rate to the reduced one will work and will compensate the increases of excise duties on tobacco. Net inflation will decline in the next couple of months, being a tick below zero, which will be the consequence of a renewed decline in food prices and some slowdown in core inflation. Growth of administered prices will be negative throughout the rest of this year as a consequence of the announced sharp decrease in regulated price of natural gas for households. Regulated prices will renew their growth in 2017. In the rest of this year, we can expect that the core inflation will slow down to approximately 1%, which will be a consequence of continued anti-inflationary effect of declining import prices and due to the fact that wage growth has halted. After that, we can expect that core inflation will accelerate to 2% in 2017 as inflationary pressures from the domestic economy will be driven costs and prices in domestic economy amid roughly neutral effects of foreign prices and imported inflation. Food price growth will recover starting the beginning of next year from this year's declines. After the some one-off effects from recent past will fade away, such as the effects of lifting of the milk quotas in the EU or embargo on imports of selected food and agricultural products to Russia. After that, we can expect that food prices will renew their growth and accelerate it to more than 3% at the end of the forecast horizon. Here you can see that the growth of nominal marginal costs in consumption sector will recover and will gradually accelerate as the domestic pressures stemming from labor market and real economy will persistently working in this direction. On the other hand, which is represented by the increased and steadily increasing yellow bars in the upper chart, the anti-inflationary effects from import prices, which are those red bars in the upper chart, will gradually decline and will not be curbing domestic inflation anymore. The domestic pressures reflecting the continued wage growth and increasing price of capital, which is shown in the lower chart, will be present over the whole, over the entire forecast horizon. Those their pro-inflationary effects will be partly offset by ongoing productivity gains. As I already mentioned, the Czech GDP growth somewhat slowed down in late 2015, and GDP will follow the same tendency in 2016, which will be the main consequence of the sharp drop in government investment. But on the other hand, domestic economy will be boosted by still relaxed domestic monetary conditions, by still low oil price, and by steadily growing foreign demand. So the GDP growth for this year as a whole will will show 2.3%, and after this year's drop in government investment fade away, we can expect a pickup in GDP growth in 2017 to 3.4%. Here you can see that we expect continued robust growth of private consumption being supported by increases in wages and salaries. The picture is consistent with retail sales figures we have been observing in recent months and with strongly recovering consumption credit growth. Significant drop in total gross fixed capital formation for this year will be primarily given by the many times mentioned by me today significant decline in gross fixed capital formation in general government sector. After this one-off effect fades away, we can expect a recovery. We can expect a pickup in fixed investment growth in 2017. Net exports will make a moderately positive contribution to the overall GDP growth for both 2016 and 2017 years, as the export dynamics will be quite robust, driven by steadily growing foreign demand and slightly outperforming that for imports of goods and services. Here you can see a very detailed breakdown of gross fixed capital formation figures. For this year, as I already mentioned several times, the main driving force is the decline of those blue bars into negative territory, which those blue bars represent the public investment. The private investment, on the other hand, will be steadily growing for both 2016 and 2017, and in 2017 we can expect pickup in government investment also, so the overall dynamics will be positive in the second half of the forecasting horizon. The positive economic developments in the Czech Republic have been reflected in the ongoing improvement in the labor market we have seen over the last couple of quarters or maybe years now. We can expect that the employment growth expressed in full-time job equivalent will continue to grow, but its pace will somewhat decelerate. This increase of the number of employees converted into full-time job equivalent will be driven by the number of employees, while the number of hours worked per employee will kick in only during the second half of this year and having positive contribution after that. As you know, the nominal wage growth in the business sector showed a tendency to accelerate in the first half of last year, but this acceleration has stopped in the second half of the last year, and we can expect for this year that the nominal wage growth in business sector will show a similar pace compared to what we've seen in the fourth quarter of the last year. After that, it will accelerate in 2017, which will be driven by the return of inflation to CNB's 2% target and by the further pickup of economic growth in the Czech economy and by the generally strong labor market. the wage dynamics in business sector will reach more than 5% in 2017. As for the non-business sector, quite closely related to what I've said about the fiscal policy, we can expect that this year's increases of 3.1% will accelerate to almost 5% in 2017, as the government will increase its current spending, such as wages and salaries, etc. Our forecast predicts further decline in general rate of unemployment, showing that this decrease should decelerate in the years to come. But according to newly obtained data from the Czech Statistical Office, we have seen continued strong decline in the rate of unemployment also at the beginning of this year, with March data for seasonal adjusted rate of unemployment being at 4.1%, which is the lowest rate of unemployment in the European Union. The surprise for our forecast was to a certain extent given by the revision of the data series after the Czech Statistical Office published the new data. As I mentioned in the first part of my presentation, the CNB's forecast assumes that the nominal interest rates will be flat and the exchange rate will be used as a further monetary policy tool until mid-2017. Consistent with the forecast is an increase in nominal interest rates thereafter as a consequence of a need to tighten domestic monetary conditions, with inflation being robustly at the CNB's 2% target. So let me now provide you with a brief comparison of the new forecast with what we had expected a quarter before. In our new forecast, we have moved the assumed duration of the exchange rate commitment by 2 quarters more into the future, which is to mid-2017. Our new forecast brings lower outlook for inflation until mid-2017, which was a consequence of lower than expected net inflation for the beginning of this year, together with a lowered foreign producer price outlook, and by more subdued economic growth in 2017, more subdued economic and wage growth in 2017 in domestic economy. The downward revision of the GDP growth for this year was primarily given by the more severe decline in government sector investment compared to what we thought about it a quarter ago. On the other hand, for 2017, our GDP forecast has been revised upwards, partly as a consequence of the extension of the duration of the exchange rate commitment to a more distant future. Our new forecast brings downward revision of nominal wage growth in a business sector until mid-2017, primarily given by worse than expected data for the end of last year. In the same direction, the lower nominal wage growth outlook is consistent with lower inflation and GDP outlook for the first half of the forecast horizon. Here you can see the revision of the inflation outlook being quite visibly below the previous forecast until mid-2017 and slightly above it in the rest of 2017. The main driving force is are both net inflation and regulated prices, reflecting observed data, lower outlook for producer price in foreign producer price forecast, and weaker than previously expected growth in domestic nominal wages. Net inflation is in the new forecast revised similarly to the headline inflation, reflecting newly observed data and weaker cost pressures due to a sharper drop in import prices and lowered outlook for nominal wage growth. Unlike this, cost pressures will become stronger during 2017 as a consequence of the pro-inflationary effects of the extension of the duration of the assumed duration of the exchange rate commitment in our forecast. The administered price outlook has been shifted also moderately downwards compared to the previous forecast, as the expected decreases in natural gas for households will be more pronounced than we expected in the previous forecast. The deceleration of core inflation in the near term manifests itself in the downward revision of this outlook compared to the previous one, which is consistent with more subdued price developments in the euro area, and by the less pronounced nominal wage growth in the domestic economy. The forecast for food prices has been shifted down also for the near term due to the downward revision of the agricultural product outlook. GDP growth dynamics will be lower this year compared to the previous forecast, as we incorporated more severe decline in government sector investment for 2016. As from mid-2017, the new forecast has been shifted a little bit upwards compared to the previous one, as the assumed extension of the duration of the exchange rate commitment is relaxing further domestic monetary conditions compared to the previous forecast, where the assumed duration of the exchange rate commitment was until 2016. The forecast for household consumption growth hasn't been changed much for the whole forecast horizon. As I mentioned many times today, the downward revision of investment growth is primarily given by the government sector developments. This forecast brings positive contribution of net exports for both years, which was not the case of the previous forecast. Nominal wage growth outlook has been revised downwards almost over the entire forecast horizon, reflecting the worse than expected data for the last quarter of previous year, and this revision also corresponds to more subdued economic growth in 2016 and slower return of inflation to CNB's inflation target. As I mentioned, domestic nominal interest rates are supposed to be flat until mid-2017, and thereafter there is an increase in those nominal interest rates, which is a consequence of the extended assumed duration of the exchange rate commitment in the new forecast. More robust need to tighten monetary conditions at the end of the forecast horizon leads to the fact that that in the second half of 2017 the new interest rate path is moderately above the interest rates consistent with the previous forecast. Ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you for your attention, and I am passing the floor back to Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the opening presentation. Before your questions, I just would like to ask Mr. Tomšík to tell you or give you more information or details regarding yesterday's bank board session.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome to the bank once again. I'm very pleased to be here with you, and I don't have anything special. I just want to say that I'm here just to represent the whole bank board. So if you have any questions or you want to ask what kind of discussions we had yesterday, so I'm here to answer the questions regarding the technical issues, regarding the assumptions and the model, regarding the new forecast. I'm very pleased that there is a head of the Monetary Policy Department, Tomáš Holub, and his deputy head, Petr Krás. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I think we can start as I'm used to doing. So I would like to take like 2 or 3 questions for the first round, and I will try to combine the questions and maybe even answers, and we can continue. I think it was agreed to have like 30 minutes for the discussion, so we are starting around 35, 40, so definitely we can finish like 12:15 at the latest. Please go ahead if there is any question.
Thank you. I just would like to ask you to tell us your name and your bank or company you are from. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dana Hajková. I'm from Česká spořitelna. I would like to ask you primarily about the remark and warning of Governor Singer yesterday at the press conference, and warning that the CNB can move the level of foreign exchange commitment upwards, and link of this possible measure towards inflation expectations, and also the mention of wages as the primary measure to be followed. Because it's obvious that long-term inflation and repeated surprises in inflation can weigh on inflation expectations. However, we see quite good nominal wage growth. We see also wage negotiations which imply continuous wage growth in 2016. Also, we see that the inflation expectations by financial markets are quite well anchored. Also, the CNB itself has its wage forecast, let's say stagnant in 2016, but at a solid growth rate, and growth rate of wages over 5% in 2017. This is all quite positive. So what kinds of risks regarding wages the bank board perceives, and what is to be followed? Second part of this question is, when we see this kind of wage growth on forecast, 5% in 2017, and we see inflation not accelerating that much in the end of 2017, and the kind of worry of the bank board regarding inflation expectations and fulfilling the inflation target. I guess that it might be rather technical, not accelerating inflation at the end of the inflation forecast because of the increasing interest rate at the end of the forecast. So if you could kind of comment on this altogether. And the last part of my question is about the discussion of negative interest rates, which the Governor Singer mentioned yesterday also, but didn't give any details. So if you could please share with us some more details about this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's even more than 3 or 4 questions, but nevertheless, I will try to combine all those questions and to answer them. But first, let me take the opportunity to pick up at least one more question, if there is, some symmetries or not. But definitely, I will not forget. I wrote down like 4 or 5 questions. I will come back to those questions. Do we have some more questions? Please.
Viktor Ceisl, Komerční banka. Actually, I would like to ask much simpler question. In the last meeting when we met here, the indication about the exit was like the first half of the year, and in the forecast we also saw that the inflation is already on the target at the time. Now the indication from the bank board is mid of the year. For the Q2, we see inflation in the forecast at 1.8. Okay, in the Q3 it is a bit higher, but could you give us strict guidance? What should be the conditions for the bank board for the lifting the floor, as following the public appearances of many board members? We hear a lot of different conditions for what would it be to lift the floor.
Okay, so I think I will try at least to start with some of those questions. First of all, regarding the discussions about, to move the floor, move the level, regarding what kind of conditions we need to see to think about it, and regarding the wage growth, let me start with, some discussion on this issue. First of all, we have clearly declared that we have never ever ruled out any tool. The same holds for any possibilities to move floors. The same holds for negative interest rates. And once we decide on using this floor, using negative interest rate, we need to see some current macroeconomic conditions. And it's obvious if you look back, what we saw in November 2013 at that time, this economic, I would say, situation was as follows, that at that time we had the longest recession in the period of the Czech Republic. Yeah. At that time there was the core inflation in negative territory, and at that time there was, afraid of, that the CPI could go even below 0 in negative territory again. So at that time there was no discussions, regarding what else we have to see to embark on a fixed commitment. And now, once we look at the current situation, we see definitely the difference. The difference is that, there is no recessions. There is clear trend of improving of the economic situation. Yeah, last year it was something as an exception. GDP growth was more than 4% for this year. We clearly predict a little bit lower GDP growth, but on the other hand, still positive territory. For next year, we expect 3.4, something like that. Definitely, we expect the growth is robust. We see inflation pressures regarding from the market. If you look at the core inflation without full prices, without food prices and oil prices, definitely it's in positive territory. Nevertheless, you know that our forecast really tried to combine all real as well as nominal variables together. And we try to say what kind of growth in economic variables we have to see to steer the economy to the steady state in next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Because our forecast almost always aiming to the inflation target at 2%. And if you look at the conditions, at the assumptions, what we need regarding the economic model, we think that the wage growth, which would be equal to the steady state, definitely could be higher. I fully understand what you are saying, that definitely current wage growth around 4%, I look at Tomáš, yeah, around 4%, definitely it's still better than it used to be like 3%, 2%, 1%. But it's still below what we would like to see regarding our macroeconomic steady state conditions. And we are thinking, or we are trying to guess what's behind. And one of the theory, one of the hypotheses, which was even said yesterday during the bank board meeting, is as follows, that probably it can be a result that this economy, well, has been facing very low inflation in the past 2 years. Very, below the inflation target. But still, we are very pleased that we avoid deflation. But still, we have been below the inflation target, which is 2% with some tolerance band. So we are just wondering whether, that this wage growth, which is lower than we would like to see regarding the GDP forecast, is a consequence of some low inflation environment, or whether it's a consequence that there is a time lag regarding the, decrease of unemployment, etc. As I said, another hypothesis, which was said yesterday, says that, look, definitely we see there is, unemployment rate is falling, and there is something as a, I would say, GDP output, there is something as a non-acceleration inflation rate, and probably we are going close to the narrow. And it needs some time when we see the acceleration of wage growth, which will pass to inflation. So that's why Governor yesterday said in the statement, because it's a statement of the bank board, that, well, if the first hypothesis is valid, and the first was that probably wage growth is not high as we would like to see, because it can be as a result of very low inflation environment, which can have an effect on inflation expectations. This is something we have to act, because it's our role. Our role is to stabilize inflation expectations. We don't react to, I would say, external shocks, which we saw in last year regarding the oil prices, regarding the food prices. But we also said we have to wait, because if we see that, the wage growth will accelerate, which is the second hypothesis, there is no need to react. So I'm just trying to combine, I'm just trying to pass the discussion we had yesterday, that we know that the macroeconomic situation, which we compare now with the situation in 2013, and we are thinking about the same tool, to change the level of FX commitment. It's the same tool, but the economic situation is completely different. And we need to know what's really behind, regarding that the inflation is currently quite low. And as I said, we have to see whether the external shocks, which primarily hit headline inflation, do have some spillovers regarding the second round effects, regarding to the inflation expectations. So we have to see it and wait. But on the other hand, as I said, the real economic trends, they are quite visible, they are positive. So I personally, it's my personal thing now, so I think that's why, by the way, Bank Board decided to wait a little bit. You also asked me regarding the negative interest rates. It's still valid, and I start my answer with this, that we have never ever ruled out any tool, but we have clearly described to the public that we still believe that for the small open economy, it's a tool which is not very effective to speed up inflation. It can be very effective to help us to keep the FX commitment and not to invite some huge capital inflow from abroad based on interest rate parity. Yeah. So I'm just saying that, we are definitely ready to use this tool, but we have just checked it out that we have already published figures regarding our FX interventions in March. And if you look at the figures, you see we almost all, there was no need to really have serious discussions regarding negative interest rates, because look at the figures published in March. We hadn't at that time experienced with really any significant inflow. But still, when this tool is in our toolkit, we are ready to use it, but this is not something as a key monetary policy tool in this macroeconomic environment for us. Yeah. Maybe I'm going to pass the floor to Tomáš regarding why we think that the 5% of wage growth should be appear in 2017, etc. And I will come back to the second questions regarding the conditions, how to specify the exit, etc. Yeah, but Tomáš, regarding the wage growth, please.
Thank you. The 5% wage growth in 2017 is quite consistent with the fact that we forecast real economic growth at 3.4% with already quite slow employment growth, because the pool of available labor will be mostly exploited. So productivity growth will be, let's say, around 3% in 2015. At the same time, we expect that inflation will be approaching, and in the end of the year actually slightly exceeding our 2% inflation target. So we think that the 5% inflation, 5% nominal wage growth forecast for 2017 is consistent with relatively swift economic growth and tight labor market. Assuming that, and this is the key assumption, assuming that inflation expectations remain anchored to the 2% inflation target. Of course, if there were negative second-round effects of the low prevailing inflation environment so far into inflation expectations, then we could, of course, observe lower nominal wage growth in 2017, and that would be already something undesirable from the monetary policy point of view, because it would signal that inflation expectations are not well anchored to the target, that the target is no more playing a 100% credible role in shaping people's expectations and the way that wages are formed and negotiated. So that's one of the debates and one reason why observed nominal wage growth will be a very important signal for us if inflation expectations remain well anchored.
Let me come back to the second question. It was regarding, it was about the conditions of exit and some assumptions, the forecast, etc. Again, so I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on this issue. First of all, I have to say that, the commitment hasn't been changed and it's still quite clear. The commitment says that we are going to keep FX, I would say, floor until 2017. That's the commitment. Just new forecast assumes, and I'm going to read it, that the exchange rate as a monetary policy instrument has moved 2 quarters farther into future. It means to mid-2017. But it's it's assumption, it's the forecast. Why we are saying that? Because, it's May 2016, and it's really difficult to clearly say how the macroeconomic situations will look like in next 10, 12 months. So that's why we have to produce forecast, we have to put exit somewhere, but regarding the commitment, we keep it 2017. Nevertheless, at least we have been already communicating that the probability of exit is around mid-2017. So I'm just trying to clearly respond to your questions that we know that there can be some changes in the bank board compositions. But still, you have to distinguish, I mean, between commitment and probability. And we also believe that, you know, why we produce forecast, model-based forecast, because it's a really very useful tool to communicate to the public what's behind our decisions, how we really think. And we believe that, I mean, the forecast help us to steer the communication, to steer inflation expectations. And it's always very difficult to say why I vote against the forecast. Because if I vote against the recommendation, against the forecast, I have to clearly explain what kind of uncertainty, what kind of risk I really see. So I'm trying to say that even if there are changes in the bank board, I mean, the staff stays here, the model-based forecast stays here. And, you know, it's very difficult to change the whole macroeconomic situations in 1 month in the changes of the bank board. And this this institution has been, I mean, always predictable. This institution has been always transparent, publishing not only forecasts, but also publishing assumptions. So I personally believe we shouldn't expect any, I mean, change from left to right, yeah. So that's why we publish everything. We invite you for these discussions, we publish statements, we publish even protocols 6 years old. So this is something that will be my answer to your questions. Yeah.
Maybe one addition to the answer. If I understand it correctly, you are asking whether we need to be already above the target at the time of the exit, given that inflation will be slightly below it in Q2 and then slightly above it in Q3. If this is the question, we always highlighted that the main focal point is ability to achieve inflation target after the exit in a sustainable manner. Of course, even with some tightening of monetary conditions. We don't know exactly the composition of the tightening of monetary conditions after the exit. There might be some appreciation of the nominal exchange rate, some interest rate hikes, perhaps in reality slower than in the forecast and with some time lag after the exit, but we need to assume that the exit will imply some tightening of monetary conditions. That's the definition of the exit, actually. You leave the zero lower bound environment and you leave the unconventional tool. So it's not so much important whether before the exit you will be 1/10 or 2/10 of a percentage point above or below the target, but you certainly need to be sure that after you lift the floor, inflation will not go back significantly below the target. That's why we think that according to the forecast, middle of 2017 now looks as a most probable timing of the exit. Of course, without being specific to an exact date or months or something like that.
If your question was about it, so it's very easy. We have been always communicating, so we want to make sure, so once we really, abandon the FX floor, we want to make sure that we will not be forced to come back to the FX floor, you know, and that's why we clearly said it would be nice, to have definitely some buffer to be above inflation targets, so intolerance band. But as I said, and I remember I was there 3 months ago, I said, give me exactly what kind of macroeconomic situations you think we will see next during the exit period, and I will clearly answer how the exit will look like. But nobody knows that we are still living in the future, yeah? Let me take some more questions.
Okay, please your questions for a second round. First, second.
Good morning. My name is Ondřej Kurečka. I'm from AXA. I have a question about the negative interest rates. I understand that this is some kind of verbal interventions, but there is bank board on the one hand, which many times said that have unlimited resources to defend FX commitment. So, in fact, I don't really see the logic why to set up negative interest rates when CNB have these unlimited resources, which is definitely true.
So there is one more question.
Marek Dřímal, Komerční banka. I have more of a technical question. Did you make any changes in the shadow Euribor, for instance, based on the latest measures of the ECB or the market development? Thank you.
And we have one more, please. Yeah, it's yours.
Martin Paul, General Investments. Maybe one more question to the negative interest rates. If you look around at the different experience in Denmark, Japan, and in Europe, which model of negative interest rate introduction you think is the most relevant for the Czech case?
Thank you very much. So we do have 3 questions. I think those they are linked with negative interest rates, so I'm going to combine them. And the third one was regarding the shadow interest rates. I mean, Tomáš is the real expert on that. Let me start with negative interest rates. I fully understand what you are saying regarding the unlimited resources, and this is absolutely true. We do have unlimited resources to keep our FX commitment. There is no discussions. It's very easy because we can still print money, and we can buy as much as we can. But the question is as follows. Well, does it really mean that once we do have unlimited resources, that we should invite foreign capital to get free of charge just speculation or yields? As I said, I was there in February here, I clearly said, in 2012, when we reached zero lower bound, at that time, there was no central bank with negative interest rates, no one. And now it's 2016. And there are like 5, 6, they do have negative interest rates. And I'm not talking about some outliers, I'm talking about the Eurozone. So we are living completely in a different environment. And why I should, provide from uncovered interest rate parity, covered interest rate parity. Why shall I invite, and really invite, and to provide free of charge, very easy speculations, very easy yields. And we were aware about that. It was in 2013 when we embarked on a fixed commitment, because at that time we made a significant change in our communication. And I look around, all of you remember that, because most of you, I know them. Please recall that at that time, we interrupt publishing our figure regarding the assumptions of FX, of exchange rate. You remember that? And we clearly said, you know why we interrupt publishing this figure? Because nobody wanted to invite foreign capital to speculate against central bank. We will never ever lose. We will never ever be beaten. We always will be a winner because we can print as much as we can. There is no anyone who can print Czech currency. But it doesn't mean that we should provide, as I said, free invitation. As I said, in March we didn't see any significant inflow speculated on covered interest rate parity. Once we see that, we are ready. We are ready, even in technical way, we are ready to introduce it immediately. Nobody needs to wait for regular bank board meeting. There can be extraordinary board meeting anytime. So we are ready to do that. And let me to the 3 questions. What kind of model? I think this is not my role to say in what kind of model we are going to implement. There are several models. We have studied all of them. And I am very pleased that this institution is responsible not only for price stability, but as well as for financial stability. I mean, it means that, we know data coming from all banks, from all pension funds, etc. So we know, once we, start with this or that model, how this model are going to affect the financial stability. We are also aware that, this economy, Czech economy, is one of really not very many economies in the whole world which is operating in withdrawing liquidity. This is something as a consequence of, I would say, privatizations, of inviting foreign investors here, of sterilization in the 90s. Again, most of you remember this time. So we know about the specific feature of the Czech banking sector. That's why we are going, if we see, that there is a time, there is a necessity to use negative interest rates. We know about all those models, we know about all those features of the Czech economy, and we also know that, economy is based on marginal changes, on marginal revenues, on marginal comparison. So if we, and I remember that I got a questions from Mr. Sobíšek last time whether we were voting on negative interest rates. At that time I said, no, we didn't vote. Yesterday we also didn't vote, but once there is a time to vote on that, we know about this model, and we will take in our mind all those models, all those features, all those, I would say, specification of the Czech financial systems, just to prevent inviting foreign capital and not to really put penalties or harm financial sector. And Tomáš, I'm going to ask you, please, can you answer the question regarding the shadow interest rates?
Yeah, we did reflect the extension of QE, the volume of QE and the shadow rate, and we quantified the additional 20 billion per month to 25 basis points of the shadow rate being pushed further into the negative territory compared to the market yield curve.
So, thank you very much. I think that it will be a last round. Please, your questions for the last round.
Hello. One more question to link again to the discussion about negative interest rates and interventions. We have observed that actually the inflow of foreign capital is very much coincides with primary issues of government bonds of the Ministry of Finance. Given the limited liquidity of the secondary market, this might be a key issue to consider for the bank board. Is there any discussion between the Czech National Bank and Ministry of Finance regarding this issue? Thank you.
Thank you very much for these questions. I think I got a very similar one. We had the last meeting here, but nevertheless I'm going to answer that. Do we have some more questions, please? Yeah, please.
Petr Dufek, CSOB. I would like to know your opinion on real estate prices, because some investors see that it's opportunity for investing in the case of so low interest rates on the market. And the second question is for Mr. Tomšík, and it's quite theoretical. How do you like the idea of helicopter money? Thank you.
Okay, so let me take the last questions. Read the last one. We do have no question. Thank you. So I will try to answer the questions. First was regarding the negative interest rates and regarding and you asked me regarding the interventions, speculations. It was, Dana, it was about primary issues. Yeah. Look, if there is any discussions, meetings, negotiations between two institutions, CNB and Ministry of Finance, I'm not definitely allowed, I do not have any mandate to comment it. Yeah, no. But you started, your questions that you saw the correlation between the inflow of capital and the period of issuing bonds, it seems to me that it's still a hypothesis, you know. It can be completely in a different period, etc. But nevertheless, I'm very pleased that we do have regular meetings with all, I would say, ministers, because governor or vice governors, they attend the government meetings regularly, and the same holds for the Minister of Finance, that he has a right and he is invited to attend any bank board meeting. So definitely there is a cooperation, and that's all what I can say. Yeah, on a regular basis, by the way. Regarding real estate prices, first of all, as I said in my previous round of the questions, that this institution is quite lucky that, we do have data, we are responsible not only for price stability, but as well as for whole financial stability. So we do have the Department of Financial Stability operating here, in this building. And by the way, that's my role to supervise, this department. And of course, it's one of the sources that we use for our forecast. Detailed data regarding real estate prices, regarding development, regarding the mortgages, etc., will be published in our financial stability report in June, in next few weeks. Yeah. Nevertheless, even if I accept your theory that there is something as a huge growth, of prices in this sector, this is always a question. There's always a question whether you can really see it in the whole, Czech economy, or whether it's a specific feature for some regions, or whether it's sustainable or not. So far, definitely, we don't see that, this situation should be against what we would like to see regarding the monetary policy. So we don't see that they are, fighting each other. And as I said, so far we have been, below inflation target for 2.5, almost 3 years. Yeah, so I don't see any problems, and more detailed analysis will be published in our financial stability report in the next few months. Regarding helicopter drop of money, I think that I already said that, when I joined the central bank, it was in 2006, 10 years ago. At that time, nobody was thinking about this theory. And it's very difficult to say to any tool that I will never ever use it. I will definitely, I can't imagine what kind of monetary policy instrument will look like in next 10 years, in 2026. So very simple answer would be that I can't rule it out. And there are even some other tools that that I have never ever thought about. But if not forced, but if I will have to answer to myself whether I'm ready to use them, I will always ask, okay, what's my mandate? What is the inflation expectations? And what other tools I do have to use. And one of your colleagues said that FX commitment, there is no limitation. You can always print money and use it. So far, even if you think about helicopter drop money, well, so far you can always use, before you embark on helicopter drop money, you can use FX floor. And I think it was clearly said by the bank board yesterday, if it's necessary, we are ready to use what we already used in 2013. We know about the economic difference, but still, if it's necessary, it has been proved that this tool, FX commitment with a different level, it's a very, I would say, significant, very useful, and very productive for the small open economy. At least we have avoided deflation. So nobody can say that it didn't work. It really worked. And if it's necessary, why shall we think about helicopter money? We can come back to the FX commitment. Thank you. So it was my pleasure to meet all of you. It's 12:15, as I said, and I'm very pleased that you have come. And I think I can announce that the next meeting with you, economist, analyst, chief economist, will be in August. And I think that my colleague, Vice Governor Hampel, has already made a commitment to come. So it was enough to see Mr. Tomšík twice. So now you can look forward to meeting Mr. Hampel in August. Thank you and enjoy your nice weekend.